The cold front arrived without warning. 1 hour the sky was a friendly pale blue, and the next it was crowded with low gray clouds that looked like heavy blankets. Wind pushed down the street, rattling signs and lifting napkins from the cafe's patio tables. He stood at the glass door of his small coffee shop in northern Arizona and watched the town change the way a face changes when a chill runs through it. People walked faster. They tucked their chins into their scarves. He checked the time, checked the espresso machine, checked the tip jar like it might have a weather report inside it. When his shift ended, he pulled on his heavy wool coat, the one with the deep pockets, the one that felt like a promise against the cold, and stepped into the evening air that smelled like wet dust. At the bus stop across the street, he saw a woman standing alone. She wore a thin sweater and held her arms close to her body, shifting from foot to keep warm. The bench was metal, and she kept looking at it, as if sitting might make her colder. He had seen her once or twice in the mornings, always moving, with a careful patience as if she was measuring each step and choosing the least hard one. He looked both ways, crossed and said hello. She looked up surprised, then answered softly, her breath a small cloud. Her hair was pulled back, and her eyes were steady even as the wind kept teasing at the loose strands near her ears. He asked if she was okay, and she explained she was waiting for a bus that was running late. Her voice carried the tone of someone used to waiting. He did not think much before he spoke next. The words were simple. "You can take my coat." She tried to refuse, saying she was fine, saying she could handle it, saying it was not so bad. But her shoulders were tight and her fingers were pale. He unbuttoned the coat, placed it around her shoulders, and stepped back, not making a show of it. She sank into the warmth with a sigh that seemed to move through her whole body. After a moment, she smiled in a way that warmed the space around them. She told him her name, Alana. She said she was Apache, passing through town for a few weeks trying to sort out some paperwork and look for work. She spoke in a practical way, like someone who keeps a list in her head and checks it twice a day. He introduced himself, and they shared that polite small talk that strangers use as a bridge. They spoke about the cafe, about the way the wind swept the dust into little spirals, about how the bus company had changed routes last month. A bus roared by in the opposite direction, the lights carving white lines across the road, and for a second they both went quiet. Then she looked at him, eyes bright with a mix of relief and comedy, and said, "You saved me. Marry me." She said it like a joke people tell when something is too big to name. He laughed, a little startled, and shook his head. She laughed too, and the sound lifted the cold for a moment. The bus finally came, and as she climbed the steps, she turned back and repeated, "I'm serious, marry me." It made the driver chuckle and made him blush, which only made the driver laugh harder. The next morning, when he opened the cafe, he thought about the coat and the smile and the odd, playful proposal. It sat in his mind like a pebble he could not ignore, rolling it from thought to thought as he steamed milk and called out orders. Around mid-morning, the bell over the door chimed, and there she was again. Alana, hair still pulled back, sweater, still thin, but with his coat folded over her arm like a borrowed book returned with care. She ordered a coffee and stood at the counter, watching him with that same steady gaze. "I brought this back," she said, setting the coat down gently. "And I brought a thank you." She slid a small bead bracelet across the counter, the pattern simple and clean. He tried to refuse the gift, but she insisted. The conversation traveled easily. She asked if the pastries on the shelf were baked in-house. He told her the blueberry muffins were. She nodded and said, "You saved me from turning into a blueberry popsicle last night. Marry me." The barista who worked the register blinked, then grinned. The regular at the corner table looked up from his laptop, and by the time Alana took her coffee to a seat by the window, 2 people had already whispered, "Did she just propose?" It did not take long for a small joke to become a running story. By lunch, one of his friends texted, "Congrats on the engagement." He replied with a line of laughing emojis and tried to move on. But every time Alana stopped by, twice that week, then 3 times the next, she used the same line in the same half-playful, half-earnest way. She said it to the bus driver. She said it to the barista on morning shift. Once she said it to a delivery guy who tipped his cap and said, "Best of luck to the happy couple." The more people made light of it, the less light it felt to him. He started to understand that the line held something heavy behind it, something about safety, about not being invisible, about needing a person to say, "I see you," in a world that sometimes looks past people who are tired and cold. He tried to help in a way that felt respectful. He wrote down the number of a local shelter that worked with tribal community services. He looked up the hours for the office that handled ID replacements and told her when the line was shortest. He offered to call a caseworker he knew from the cafe's annual winter drive. He told her he could walk her through the forms and even drive her to the clinic if she needed a checkup. He did not offer more than he could handle, and he did not speak like he was the answer to everything. He tried to share the load, not take it over. Still, a few of his friends warned him to be careful. "Don't get too involved," one said gently. "You don't know her situation," another added. He understood their concern, but the phrase "too involved" sat wrong in his stomach. What was the right amount of care? How do you measure it? He kept moving between the coffee grinder and the sink and the door, holding all these questions like cups he did not want to drop. One afternoon, as the sky grew darker earlier than it should, the news on the cafe TV mentioned a winter storm warning. The words crawled along the bottom of the screen while a map glowed in shades of blue. People started rushing in to buy hot drinks to take home. He updated the little chalkboard sign to say they would close early if the storm hit. By the time, he stacked the last 2 chairs on the patio and brought the plant by the door inside. The first small flakes were floating down, slow and uncertain, as if they were testing the town's patience. He stood at the register, rubbing warmth back into his fingers, when the bell chimed again. Alana stepped in, cheeks pink from the cold, eyes a little red from the wind. She carried a small duffel bag, the kind that looks too light to hold a life but often does. She set the duffel near the door and came to the counter. She did not bring the coat this time because she was still wearing it. It looked too big on her, but in a kind way, like it was taking on the shape of a hug. He raised a hand to greet her, and she smiled, but it was a tired smile. "Storm moved faster than the radio said," she explained. He nodded and handed her a cup of hot tea before she even asked. She cupped it and breathed in the steam as if it were the first kind breath she had seen all day. "I went to the place you told me about," she said, meaning the shelter. "They're full tonight. They said to try again in the morning." She lifted one shoulder like it was not a surprise. He felt a small rise of worry in his chest, like watching a glass slide toward the edge of a table. She looked around the cafe, the people packing up, the chairs flipped, the closed sign already waiting to be turned. Then she looked back at him and said quietly, "I'm serious." He waited, unsure what she was about to ask. "Not about romance," she added with a thin smile. "About survival." The words were plain, and because they were plain, they hit harder. She was not asking for anything grand. She was asking not to be left out in the storm in a town where she knew a handful of bus routes and 3 names, one of which was his. He thought of the warnings from his friends, of the way rumors leapfrog truth. He also thought of the many visitors who pass through town and leave no ripple, and of how this woman had become, in a short time, a story that was being told about him, around him, and sometimes without him. He set the tea down and leaned on the counter. He asked where she planned to go tonight if the shelter could not take her. She shrugged and said maybe the bus station, maybe the all-night laundromat, maybe the porch outside the community center where there was a bit of windbreak. None of those answers felt good. He checked the time again. The wind outside pressed its flat hand against the window. He could feel the staff waiting for his cue to close. He could feel the town bracing. He could feel the line between kind and careless, between helpful and harmful, and he did not want to step wrong. He told himself to breathe, to keep things simple, to think about what help looks like when it is done with respect. Morning came with a pale light that turned the snow into a soft, bright blanket. He woke before his alarm, the way a person wakes when a promise is still fresh in the mind. The motel was only a few blocks from his cafe, and the sidewalks were lined with clean footprints from early dog walkers and the brave few on their way to work. He brewed a quick cup of coffee at home, but it tasted like nervous energy, so he poured it out and decided to wait for the cafe beans. He checked his phone. One text from the caseworker who had helped the night before, confirming an appointment at 8 o'clock and adding a simple note, "You did the right thing." He did not know this caseworker well, but the message eased something tight in his chest. At the cafe, the air smelled like cinnamon and fresh espresso. He sat up early, pushing the front mat into place, checking the milk and warming the ovens for muffins. Outside, flakes still drifted down, but a thin winter sun made the town look hopeful. He placed a reserved sign on the small corner table so he could sit there with Alana and organize the morning. At 7:30, the bell over the door made its soft ring and she stepped in, carrying the duffel and wearing his coat. The coat looked less like a borrowed thing now and more like a friend. She had slept, he could tell, because there was a calm in her eyes that had not been there the night before. She breathed in the coffee smell, and her shoulders dropped just a little more. He offered her a hot breakfast sandwich, the simple kind that sits warm and honest on a plate, egg, cheese, and a soft roll. She thanked him, then thanked him again, in a way that showed both gratitude and care for not taking his help for granted. They sat at the corner table with 2 mugs of coffee, a small notebook between them and his phone on the table for the appointment call-in. He explained the plan in clear steps. Confirm the appointment for this morning, get to the office, check on the ID forms, ask about the bus voucher, and get a referral to the clinic for a quick checkup. She nodded slowly, taking it in. When the time came, he dialed and then passed the phone to her so she could speak for herself. She gave her name, repeated her birthday, and listened carefully as the caseworker outlined what she would need to bring. The list was surprisingly short. That was the benefit of reaching the right person at the right time. They stepped back outside and felt the dry cold on their faces. He drove his old sedan careful through the slow streets. The town looked like a postcard, all white roofs and clean paths where people had shoveled. She looked out the window, quiet, then said, "Thank you for not making a big speech about saving me." He glanced over, a bit surprised, and she gave a small smile. "Some people like to be the hero," she added. "You just made a plan." He nodded and said that plans are like maps, simple but helpful when the weather turns. She seemed to like that. They pulled into the small lot outside the office, a low building with a glass door and track lights that hummed. Inside, the waiting room was warm and painted in calm colors. A poster near the desk listed the documents people often needed, from ID cards to forms for housing and health visits. The receptionist recognized her name from the early call and handed her a pen without fuss. The forms were written in fairly plain language, and he offered to read them out loud in case any part felt confusing. She read them herself and filled in the blanks, stopping once to ask about a line that did not apply. It turned out she would need 2 pieces of information she did not have. The caseworker came out friendly and focused and found a simple solution. She could bring a copy later that week, or a trusted contact could confirm it by phone. The caseworker asked if she had a trusted contact. She said her aunt might be available, but the number was in an old notebook. The caseworker smiled and said she could try to find the number through the tribal office. She made 2 quick calls, then handed over a small sticky note with the aunt's number and a time to call later that day. He watched all of this with quiet relief, pleased to see how well a trained person could move a heavy process along. The caseworker turned to him and thanked him for walking Alana through the door. "It helps," she said. He said it was easy to help when the person asked clearly, and the office was kind. Everyone smiled a little at that. The caseworker gave Alana a bus voucher and a small envelope with a clinic referral tucked inside. She also scheduled a follow-up for next week and circled the date in pen. On the way out, the winter air felt friendlier. They decided to stop by the clinic before the morning rush. The nurse took her temperature and asked a few easy questions. Everything looked okay, just the normal strains of winter. She left with a small bottle of vitamins and a big dose of reassurance. Outside, the sun pushed through the gray and a few patches of blue opened up like windows in the sky. He drove her back to the cafe where the morning crowd had started to find their way inside. The regular at the corner table asked how the roads were. He said, "Much better than last night." The barista on shift slid a muffin across the counter for Alana and winked. People did not ask for details. They just offered warmth, which was exactly the right size of kindness. They sat again at the corner table, this time to talk about next steps in a calm way. She said she felt clearer now. The bus voucher meant she could reach a relative 2 towns over, and the follow-up appointment meant she would not disappear from the system. He asked if there was anything else he could do that would help without stepping in too far. She thought for a moment and said yes. She wished there was one place in town where people could find the right phone numbers without hunting through 4 websites and 3 offices. He looked at the community board on the wall, cluttered with guitar lesson flyers and lost cat notices, and imagined a clean, simple set of resource cards. He said they could make it happen. She smiled, and this time it was a bright, easy smile, like sunlight through a window after days of cloud. That afternoon, he pulled out a stack of index cards and placed them on the counter beside the tip jar. While the espresso machine hummed, he wrote the names of trusted local groups in big, readable letters: the shelter, the office they had just visited, the clinic, the food pantry, and the hotline for winter shelter overflow. He added short notes in plain words, what they help with when they answer the phone, how to ask for a person who could listen. He asked his staff to check the numbers. They did, then added a few of their own. He found a small crate and labeled it coats and coffee. He wrote another small sign that said, take a coat if you need one. Leave one if you have extra. By evening, 3 coats sat in the crate, along with 2 knitted scarves someone had dropped off. The corner of the cafe looked like a small promise. The next day, she returned with the coat cleaned and a tiny patch added to a loose seam. She carried the bead key fob she had made and set it on the counter like a quiet thank you. He tried to say she did not owe him anything, and she interrupted gently, saying, this is not about owing. This is about giving. He understood the difference. She pinned a new index card to the board, one she wrote herself, listing a tip she had learned over the past weeks: where to wait for the bus when the wind changes direction, how to ask for the manager if the first answer is too quick, and which morning is best for a walk-in at the clinic. Her handwriting was neat, and her notes were both kind and practical. Over the next month, small things stacked up like bricks in a good wall. People left coats and people took coats. A retired teacher brought a box of knitted hats with a note that said, made with warm thoughts. The cafe added a free hot water station for tea. The caseworker stopped by once, ordered a latte, and taped up a flyer that explained a new drop-in hour. The barista learned how to say the names of local groups in the simplest way so people would remember them. He watched this all happen with a feeling that had no loud edges. It was not pride. It was not relief. It was something like rightness, quiet and steady, the way a chair feels when its legs do not wobble. One morning, a familiar voice floated through the door. Alana walked in, wearing a light jacket instead of the heavy coat because the day had finally turned warmer. Her face looked rested in a way he had not seen before. She waved, ordered a coffee, and sat at the corner table with him like an old friend. She told him she had a job lined up 2 towns over and a good place to stay. The aunt had answered the phone and helped confirm the last piece of information for the ID. The follow-up appointment had gone well, and the caseworker had kept her word at every step. He listened, happy for the quiet cooperation of small systems that sometimes work when people inside them care enough to make them work.